Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us on our webinar today. Let's go ahead and get started. So today's webinar is what is functional safety management? What really is this about? We're going to explore all about functional safety management and the safety life cycle today. For those of you that do not know me yet, my name is Lauren Stewart. I am a CFSE and I work here at Exeter. I mostly work with our mechanical customers, helping them achieve IE61511 certification. And I also do the IEC61511 trainings and other trainings as well. For those of you that do not know Exida, we, just in case you're new, we're a global company. I like to say no matter where you are or where your customers are, we have somebody close by to help with any of your functional safety needs. So whether that's in cybersecurity, alarm management, or functional safety, we have somebody close by to help you out. Exida is involved in the complete supply chain of functional safety in multiple industry sectors. So whether you're the OEM making the devices who require product certification, the whole way through to the end users who are using those certified products. Exida has consulting, tools, software, services, books, webinars, blogs, all sorts of information to help you along the way. So whether you're in, once again, functional safety, security, or reliability, we'll be able to help you through any of your functional safety needs. I quickly mentioned our tools on the last slide, and we have tools that were designed really with you in mind. They are to help save you time and money. Well, how do they do that? They increase your efficiency and increase your productivity. So if you're trying to do SIL verifications or selection, PHAs or LOPAs, all the way through to alarm rationalization or cyber risk assessments, we have tools that can help your job go much smoother. And in case you are not familiar with the Exida certification, we also have certification, and we certify people, products, systems, devices, processes, anything you can think of. So whether you're looking at IEC 61508 certification for a device, the whole way through to if you want to show your competency and you want to prove that you are an expert in functional safety, we can even certify a personnel with the personnel certification program. And we'll talk about how that's one way to show your competency coming up in the webinar. But let's get into the main reason you're here, today's webinar. So we're going to talk about functional safety management, all about that. Throughout the webinar, if you have any questions, please feel free to write them in the panel of the GoToWebinar access. I'm not the best at stopping and looking for questions and answering them throughout the webinar, but I always make time at the end to make sure to answer any questions that you may have. I know in this morning's webinar, we had a ton of questions. So if that is the case, again, with this afternoon, I can go ahead and answer all of the questions and send them out afterwards to anyone that signed up for this webinar. But today we're going to mostly focus on IEC 61511 and the standard, the functional safety standard, and show how it not only defines that a functional safety management system has to be in place, but it also talks about this thing called a safety life cycle and its activities. But what does that really entail? Well, the standard is built around that safety life cycle concept to provide some consistency and a consistent approach to reduce risk, to identify the risk, and to reduce the risk into whatever your company's tolerable risks are. So today's webinar, we're going to introduce that functional safety life cycle, talk about what it means and how to manage it. We're then going to talk about what it means for a manager and what you need to be aware of and considering throughout the whole safety life cycle. We're going to also talk about the importance of performing preventative maintenance and how, it's easy to say, let's cut a budget and let's maintenance be that budget to cut. But when it comes down to functional safety, when it comes down to a serious accident, and possibly even if there's an accident, litigation, if there was that arbitrarily cutting of expenditures. We'll talk all about that today. So I always start this talk with, well, when do you hear about functional safety? When does safety really come up? And I'm not just talking about don't trip and fall. I'm talking about functional safety. Well, functional safety comes up after an accident usually. And recent accidents actually have shown that there are insufficiencies in process safety management, and these accidents are exposing them and bringing them to the surface. Things like poor safety culture, lack of mechanical integrity, or poor maintenance, poor training, poor competency. All of that has to do with functional safety management. One other thing to remember throughout this entire webinar is when we're talking about the management of functional safety, yes, we're making sure that big explosion or that big release does not happen, but the management of functional safety is more than that. It is also to make sure those systematic faults that have occurred in the past don't occur again or don't keep happening. It's also to maintain process safety and really just to ensure the integrity of your SIS implementation. There was a study done, and the study was done a little while ago, but the same concepts keep on coming up. The study was done by the HSE, or the Health and Safety Executive in the UK, and it looked at a number of different industrial accidents and tried to figure out the primary causes of accidents involving control systems. And when it really broke it down, I believe there were 34 major accidents, and when they broke it down, they found out that some of those incidents had multiple contributors. But anyway, there were over 50 of these primary causes that were taken into consideration. 44% of those. That most significant portion of why incidents involving control systems were happening was because of poor safety function specifications. Other things came across, other causes came across, such as changes after commissioning, including online changes at like 21%, operation and maintenance errors, and design and implementation errors, both at 15%, and installation and commissioning errors at 6%. But as you can see, that the bulk end was in the beginning in that specification. There are problems in almost every activity leading to the operational of your safety instrumented systems, but a lot of it was up in that front end, in the engineering process, as well as in the back end. Seeing this study, it's obvious that people aren't using a life cycle based approach, that there's room, or major room, for improvement in both the engineering and front end, as well as the operation and maintenance and decommissioning in the back end. And so what is this really? We usually get asked first and foremost, well, is this required? Well, is it required by law? Well, technically, no, it is not required by law. But first of all, are you following OSHA? Because OSHA requires that you are following best engineering practices, and those best engineering practices is considered IEC 61511, or what was known as ISA 84, and RAGRGAP, or recognized and generally accepted good engineering practices. And why is that? Well, that's because the standard, first of all, is a performance-based standard, which is a great thing. It can be a little tricky as well, but instead of giving you exactly what you need to follow and everybody doing the exact same thing, the IEC 61511 allows you to kind of be more flexible. It's letting you know what the end goal needs to be, and it's letting you as a company decide how you want to achieve it. And the standard is based around that safety life cycle. The safety life cycle, well, first and foremost, the reason you have a safety life cycle is to make sure that you're not repeating the problems of the past. If you are doing the approach of the functional safety life cycle, you're going to be recognizing the problems of the past, correcting them, and making sure they are not going to be implemented again. It's also to provide a constant approach to identifying risk and taking that risk out, mitigating it. That might not be a big deal if you're a small company. What if you're a large company? What if you have sister companies or parent companies? Are you all identifying risk the same way and managing it the same way? The safety life cycle also allows you to achieve optimum design. It allows you to balance risk reduction with performance. So if you don't need a ton of risk reduction, you don't need to over design and over analyze your SIF. And then finally, it's going to give you a means to constantly measure your performance. If you are having good documentation and you're looking at all of your misses or near misses and accidents, you can constantly measure performance, seeing if you're living up to the risk you actually think you are removing from your SIF, or if you are optimistic or in what your SIF is actually achieving. The standards that we're going to be talking about today. First of all, I've mentioned IEC 61508 a little bit, and that's actually the base safety standard. If you are not a manufacturer, you might not be as familiar with IEC 61508. It's really the standard that device manufacturers use to build their system or their products. Then it has a lot of the requirements in it. It is known kind of as the umbrella standard or the grandfather standard. It has, it covers everything in functional safety. However, if you want more specific information, there are different sector standards. So if you're in nuclear, there's a standard just for you. If you're in machinery, standard just for you. Today we're going to be talking about IEC61511 and the standards, the sector standard specifically for the process industry. Now we're going to take a look at the standard itself, the safety life cycle itself, and what it means to really, if you are following the best engineering practices, what those fundamental safety requirements are. So, as I said, here is the IEC61511 Safety Life Cycle. In case you are not familiar with it before, it is broken up into three main sections: analysis, design and implementation, and operation. In all three of those phases, you're going to have your inputs, your outputs, you're going to have documentation, and you're going to have verification activities. But if you notice something here on the left-hand side, right here we have the management of functional safety and functional safety assessments. And as you can see, it's kind of outside the safety life cycle, but it goes the whole length. And this is to show you your functional safety management plan. It's not just something that you want to consider in the analysis phase and in the engineering phase when you're building your SIF. Yeah, it's very important there, but that's not just it. It's an activity that's continuously evolving. It is continuously going on throughout the analysis, throughout the design and implementation, and even throughout the operation, completely up to decommissioning. So when we are talking about functional safety management, you might have to alter the way you are thinking of it slightly. It's not just a part-time job, it's a full-time job in the safety life cycle. The main objective of IEC 61511 is really to ensure that functional safety is achieved by following basic safety life cycle, that life cycle that we just took a look at, to make sure that the procedures are being followed and by maintaining the associated documentation with those procedures. And documentation is one of those things I'm going to harp on a lot today. You're going to be sick of me saying that word. In IEC 61508 and IEC 61511, the standard basically lets you know you can be doing everything perfectly, and if you do not document it, it means nothing. So if you are doing everything right, it really doesn't matter unless you document it. So we're going to talk about what you need in documentation and why that's so important coming up. But the essence of your safety life cycle is procedure is to first analyze your situation and document any safety requirements that might be needed. Then you have those requirements, you translate that into a documented safety system design. You can use the appropriate software, the hardware subsystems, and design methodology. Then you're going to evaluate the system against the required integrity and the reliability specifications. If they're not going to be met, go back up into the safety life cycle reanalyze it, and make any modifications as needed. And then finally, when you have the system have enough risk reduction and the reliability that's needed, the system is operated and maintained according to accepted procedures. And once again, those results are documented to ensure that the performance standards are maintained throughout the whole system's life. You might have made assumptions in those SIL calculations, and if you are not checking during operation and maintenance, you might not know if those assumptions were correct or not. The safety life cycle's whole purpose in life is to really build safer systems and that do not have the problems of the past keep crawling in. With that, you're going to be building more cost-effective systems that match design with risk and eliminates the weak link designs. Those weak link designs really cost too much. They don't provide very much quality in it and don't help with the safety. With the safety life cycle, you're going to be avoiding a lot of those systematic faults and failures because you're going to reduce you're going to clean up your documentation, you're going to clean up your people, you're going to clean up your training, and all of that will help in your systematic faults. But your safety life cycle is also going to help you reduce your potential of random faults and failures. And those are those randomly occurring faults that the failure rates will take into consideration. So functional safety management. Your functional safety management is going to be how you are governing the safety life cycle. And once again, remember, it's not just at the front end or in engineering, it's across the entire safety life cycle, the whole thing. Are you allocating life cycle responsibilities? Are you specifying the activities of those responsibilities and ensuring that those people are competent to do so? And we're going to be talking about the competency coming up and how the new standards have really focused in on competency. Your functional safety management is really managing those systematic faults to get them to an acceptable level of overall risk. One of my favorite quotes is, if you think safety is expensive, then try an accident. And you might think, well, yeah, I've seen that in the news, but that can never happen to me, right? Well, this is just a look at a couple industrial accidents. As you can see, not only does it have the financial impact listed on this table, but it also lists the injuries and fatalities. Normally, when we talk about functional safety, a lot of people do automatically think, how much am I going to get fined? How much is cleanup going to be? How much am I going to be paying out in litigation? But also think of your functional safety as how many injuries are going to occur, or even possibly how many fatalities. But no matter which industrial accident you look at, in all of these cases, they all have one thing in common, and that is poor safety cultures. Oh, and one thing to point out here, not only is it just fines and slap on the wrist, there are times where jail terms have been handed out. And it's not just the owner or the president of the company. There have been times where engineers or operators have received those jail terms as well. So this isn't something just to consider once. This isn't something to kind of brush off. This isn't something to think that it couldn't happen to you. So the main objectives of your functional safety management is, first and foremost, leverage whatever quality program you have in place. Do you have OSHA? Do you have 9001? What do you have going on? Don't sit there and reinvent the wheel if you don't have to. Your functional safety management should specify any management and technical activities throughout the whole safety life cycle, how to achieve them and how to maintain functional safety. And it needs to specify any responsibility of people, any responsibility of department, and any responsibility of organizations. Well, how do you do this? You might appoint people as the lead functional safety expert or functional safety activity. You could take your existing quality management system and extend it or modify it to include more functional safety activities. You could develop functional safety related procedures. And then always your functional safety audits. Plan, execute, audit, and improve. But when it comes to everything, there are some key issues that you want to keep in mind. And when we're talking about functional safety management, first and foremost, we want to think about the company's safety culture. And when I talk about your safety culture, it's your attitude on functional safety overall. And when it comes to safety culture, you need to think of it as a top-down approach. So whatever influence and attitude the top and the leaders of the company have will trickle down through all of the employees. So if you have the attitude that it's okay to push out proof tests and it's no big deal and worry, it's cheaper to push it out a couple more months or a couple more years, or when was the last one? I can't remember. That will come back to you, and it will be apparent. Another key issue is to create your functional safety management plan. You want to define all roles and responsibility for any key personnel dealing in functional safety and record that personnel's all those people's competency. Once again, it's not just good enough that they went to training. We need to have documentation to show that, or it's whatever you have decided to be competent in that role. Also, you have documentation and documentation control. Functional safety management is how you make sure that people that shouldn't be changing the documents aren't, and that whoever's working on your SIF has the most up-to-date and relevant documentation when they need it. Functional safety management also deals with verification, validation, and looking at the assessment. And then finally, documented processes and procedures. Once again, the standard says if you do not have it documented, it means you are not doing it. You might be doing all of the processes and procedures perfectly. However, if you are not documenting it, it means nothing. So let's say you want to make your FSM plan. Well, what's the first thing to do? Well, you want to look at the steps in sequence of work activities. You need to consider roles and responsibilities, people's competencies. Once again, that documentation structure is how are you controlling your documentation? Are there revs? Can it be released? All of that stuff. And then verification tasks for each setup. Other components of your functional safety management plan. Any safety requirement specifications. Those are all those really important things that your SIF does that was decided on at that end of that analyze phase in the safety life cycle. You're going to consider design guidelines and methods, any plans for verification and validation, and how you want to address all of those safety requirement specifications. Any specific guidelines for operation and maintenance. And then what happens if you need to make a change? How are you going to deal with that? Who can make the changes? How are they going to get approved? How are you going to deal with all of that? And then finally, when you have your FSAs, when are you going to have them? How are you going to do them? And what is your plan? Often, so far, I've talked about roles and responsibilities and competency, and I will be hounding on that more coming up in the webinar as well. But when you are deciding the roles and responsibilities, they need to be clearly communicated and documented. It needs to be for each phase of the safety life cycle and any of those associated activities. And once again, documentation, documentation, documentation. One of the specifically noted primary objectives of functional safety is your roles and responsibilities. Another phase of functional safety management is your documentation. I said it before, I'm a broken record. If you don't document it, it doesn't count. So what needs to be documented? Well, basically everything. Each phase of the safety life cycle, any information on it. You need any information on the management of functional safety, any of those safety requirement specs, any verification and validation, and any of your FSAs that you're doing. When it comes to documentation, you have to remember what's most important are those 4 R's. You need to have the right data in the right format at the right time in the right place. You know, if you have garbage in your documentation and it's not easy to find, you can't search it, anyone can change it, it's not a documentation that's going to meet all of the requirements of the standard. In addition to the roles and responsibilities, you need to write the people's competencies for each of those roles. Both IEC 61508 and 511 talked about personnel competency. IEC 61508 talked a little bit more about it. However, in the new version of IEC 61511, they took the 508 definition and even upped it a little bit. The standard committee saw that personnel competency was a major issue in functional safety and that it was causing accidents. So as a result, they really beefed up the wording in the standards. So it used to just talk about, well, if you're not competent, don't do it. If you are competent, do it, and only the people that are competent are allowed to do it. Now it talks about, well, you need to not only do that, but you have to have a list of specific items that need to be addressed and documented when considering competency of people involved in all of the activities of the functional safety life cycle. You need to have a procedure in place to manage the competency, and periodic competency assessments are now required. It's not just something that Joe was trained on it 10 years ago, he should be fine, right? The standard now says we need to continuously look at this. The standard specifically says now that a procedure shall be in place to manage the competency of all those involved in any SIS life cycle applications and activities. Any periodic assessment shall be carried out to document the competence of individuals against the activities they are performing and on change of an individual within the role. So when we talk about personnel competency, what is important are the 3 P's. You want to make sure that your personnel are properly trained and competent. And yes, those are 2 different things. You could have somebody that's properly trained and yet still be competent, not be competent in it. You're going to have your procedures. You want to make sure that they are correct and that they are being followed. And then finally, your paperwork, that documentation. If the people are properly trained, but it's not documented, it doesn't count. If they're competent and it's not documented, it doesn't count. If the procedures are being followed, but it's not documented, it doesn't count. So now you might be sitting there thinking, well, that's all well and good for those people doing brand new plants or just doing their SIF verification for the first time. That's not where I am. I have a brown plan. I'm a legacy system. How do I deal? Well, you can certainly still make functional safety a priority in your life. First of all, as I said before, do not reinvent the wheel. Use what you have. Are you 9001 compliant already? Awesome. If you are, use that information. You probably already have a lot of the documents and information, processes, procedures that you already need. Maybe it's not called the same thing or things have different names, but a lot of the times you can use what you already have. You need to, first and foremost, look at your corporate risk guidelines. Do you know what your corporate risk guidelines are? And if they were considered in the beginning, way back when. One process that we did not talk about today is a LARP, or as low as reasonably practical. It's how you remove as much risk from the system. You want to make sure that your corporate guidelines are going to meet a LARP. You want to, first of all, think about your PHAs and LOPAs. When was the last time you thought about it, looked at it, revisited, make sure the assumptions are correct? Well, if it's been more than 5 years, if you're under OSHA, warning. OSHA does say that every 5 years your PHAs need to be revisited. If your PHAs and LOPAs haven't been done in a while, A, think about redoing them, and B, well, your safety could already be compromised. There are things, assumptions that were made in the beginning that might not be relevant still. You need to look at your near misses, your accidents, any demands on the system, and make sure that you are actually removing the same amount of risk that you calculated that you would be. You want to look and see if your PHA did consider all the hazards. Once again, if you had any near misses or incidences in that 5 years period, that's key information. Take that back to your PHAs. Make sure that the hazards that you were analyzing are the correct ones. Once again, look at your LOPA. Was it done considering the highest consequence hazard? Was it done with your existing IPLs? Do you have more? Do you have less? Make sure that the LOPA is up to date. Also, if you have a legacy system in place, you may or may not be using certified devices. If you are, great. You already have your failure rates. You already know when the useful life and to pull your and when to pull the devices out of your SIF and either rehaul or refurbish or replace them. But if you're not using certified products already, maybe during turnaround or during the end of useful life, you can replace those non-certified devices with certified devices. That way you know the systematic capability of the devices in your system and the quality management of the people making your devices. Also, prior use justification can be used, but only if you have good field data. And that's just not, oh yeah, somebody was made a check mark each time there was a near miss or an accident. No, you need to have maintenance records, repair records. You need to know when the demand was on the system, if you're running in low demand or high demand. There's a lot of information to be to look at. But once again, you just need to have it all documented. If you have a run to fail policy, once again, your safety is already compromised. We have webinars talking about just this topic, and it has to do with the statistical analysis of the bathtub curve. If you are outside useful life, your failure rates that you did all your SIF calculations, out the door. They no longer count. To piggyback on that, your mechanical integrity, it needs to consider that useful life. Are you replacing it, refurbishing it before you have a shutdown or an accident, or are you just letting it run to fail? Managers, not just the people on the floor, have to ensure that mechanical integrity is followed. Once again, functional safety and functional safety management is a top-down approach. If the people at the top are not taking it seriously, nobody will. And we saw those accidents, that accident list. It's the people at the top that are also going to be evaluated in litigation if an accident ever occurred. Then, if you do have your existing system already up and running and you don't have a safety requirement specification or SRS, you can always reverse engineer one. If you already have good documentation, you have maintenance records, test records, putting together a SRS might not take you very long. It shouldn't. But if you don't have that documentation, it could take a little bit longer. But that SRS, all of those key pieces of information from the analysis and engineering of your SIF is very important. So we've covered a ton today. I'm going to try and sum it up, and then after the summary, take some questions. And I know I've covered a lot, and I will put up my email address at the end, so feel free to email me if you have questions later on. But today, hopefully this webinar taught you a little bit about IEC 61511 and functional safety management. How your functional safety management isn't just a one and done type event. It's throughout the entire safety life cycle of activities. We talked about having your safety culture, and having the right safety culture is not just important, but it's imperative. It's a top-down approach. And if management, if CEOs aren't taking functional safety seriously, nobody will. We talked about the 3 Ps, the people, procedures, and processes that must be covered by any functional safety management system. And if you have that in place, you're going to protect against those systematic errors. You need to review your corporate guidelines to make sure that all of the risk is removed as far as possible. You need to review your PHAs and LOPAs, see if you've done them recently, if they've been done correctly and done with the correct assumptions, that all the hazards have been considered and all of your IPLs have been considered as well. If you have a legacy system, that's okay. Take baby steps. We're not expecting you to go from 0 to 100 in one day. Just remember that adding in a little functional safety is better than not. So if you are taking your first step to make your SRS, or taking that first step to replace a couple of your devices with certified devices, or if you want to, a great place to start is a gap analysis. See where those gaps are and see what you need to get up to speed with the standards and where you stand. We're not expecting you to all be experts immediately. That's what we're here to help you along with. And then finally, we talked about what happens when functional safety isn't followed. You know, there could be near misses, there could be incidences. And if there is an accident, unfortunately, in the field that we're talking about, it's not just a trip and fall if it's an accident. It could be injury or multiple injury, environmental impacts, or even loss of life. When accidents occur and those results do come into play, normally legal action has been the result, even if it's just fines and regulations. And with that legal action, know that it's not just the one person in charge, but it's all of the people who knew that functional safety wasn't being achieved. So now I'm going to go ahead and take any questions. Let's see here. Okay, so we have a few. Well, first of all, we had a question about the HSE study and the breakdowns specifically. To be honest, I looked at the study a while ago. I don't remember off the top of my head if there were further breakdowns or not, but it is a publicly provided study. We could definitely take a look at that if you'd like to later. The next question I have is, you stress personnel competency. How can I prove? Okay, that's a great question. Not only have I stressed personnel competency, the standards are now stressing personnel competency. And in doing so, it's really up to your company. The standard, once again, it's not that prescriptive standard. It doesn't tell you exactly everything you need to do to achieve the goal. It just tells you the goal that you need to achieve. So if you, when you're creating your roles and your responsibilities matrix, if you've decided that this person needs a certain training, or this role needs a certain training, maybe it needed to have a certain test, depending on that role and that responsibility depends on what proof that competency may need. I know the kind of the gold standard on proving competency is your CFSE. If you want, especially if you're an engineer, if you want to show that you are an expert in functional safety, the CFSE is definitely the way to go. There are things like FSE 100 training that can help you along the way of that, but the standard doesn't say any of that is mandatory. It's really up to how your company wants to evaluate that. We have another question asking differences between safety and functional safety and their associated plans and management. In the functional safety plan, we are considering most of the time the main functional safety aspect. So, is the valve supposed to be closing? Does it need to close within a certain amount of time? What are the main goals for your SIF? What does it need? What does your SIF need to achieve those goals? Whereas your safety plan might be, well, depending on the company you're in, might be something more related to specifically safety in the plant. Your functional safety goals, you want to highlight more than just your safety plan. You also want to, once again, to be considering it over the full functional safety life cycle. You have modifications. You want to go back in the safety life cycle and reevaluate. Okay, so I have some questions coming in about functional safety and FSAs. What needs to be documented for it? What needs to be done? There's actually quite a few questions on this. And not to kind of sidestep, but that is kind of opening a whole nother can of worms itself. We actually have webinars and blogs just on that topic itself. So when I send out the questions and the answers to the questions, I will make sure to go ahead and send a link to one of the webinars talking all about FSAs, what you need to consider that, what the standard says you need to do, and what needs to be documented for those as well. At that point, this all the questions I have for this session. Thank you so much for joining today, and we look forward to seeing you at another Exeter webinar. Thank you.